So, Lone Rider here, and I wanted to touch on something that I talked about earlier, which was the idea of these red flag laws. These are laws that allow random people to report other random people to the authorities, and then the police get a special warrant and they come and they confiscate your guns. And the idea was that you could intercede before a crime is committed and hopefully prevent the shooting. And there are laws like this in several states already, and there were a lot of problems with them, and there still are. And I talked about those before. One of the issues is you really have no due process. They come without warning. They take your guns away, and then they tell you, you got a court hearing in 2 weeks. But by then your property's already been taken away. I mean, that would be like you get charged with a crime, they convict you, they sentence you to 10 years in jail, and then they say, oh, by the way, if you want to present your side and try and defend yourself, you have a court date in 2 weeks, after you've already been convicted and sentenced. That's not how it works, right? Due process takes place first. Action against you takes place only after you've been found guilty. Due process after the fact is no due process. And then there's the fact, what happens at this due process hearing? You're expected to prove a negative. You're expected to prove that you've already been deemed dangerous, supposedly, because they've taken away your guns. So you're expected to prove that you're not dangerous. You're expected to prove that not only prove that you're innocent, but prove that you're innocent of something that hasn't happened and may never happen. Right? How do you do that? I mean, if somebody came to you and said, prove you're not going to rob the liquor store on the corner of 56th and Main in 3 weeks from now. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could show them an itinerary, like if you have reservations for an airplane flight to go visit your relatives in Omaha, you could say, well, look, I'm going to be out of the country 3 weeks from now, or I'm out of the state, rather. You have a trip to the Bahamas or something, or you're going to Florida to visit grandma. And you could say, hey, look, I have airplane reservations. I'm not going to be here in 3 weeks. Maybe. But seriously, how do you prove that you're not going to do something that hasn't happened? It's kind of difficult. And that's not the way our justice system is supposed to work. You're not supposed to have to prove you're innocent. And again, there's the question of how do you prove you're innocent of something that hasn't occurred and may never occur. Then you have the fact that even if you do meet that impossible burden and prove that you're innocent of something that hasn't happened and may never happen, what judge is going to want to go on record as giving you your gun back after it's already been taken away in a very public police raid on your house that may or may not have been seen by the neighbors and reported on in the local news because you were allegedly deemed dangerous, whether you were or not? What judge is going to want to be the guy that gives that gun back? Because Caponolo forbid you actually go do something wrong with it. That judge's career ain't going very far after that, right? I mean, judges are actually a lot fairer than most people give them credit for. I worked at a courthouse when I was in college. I saw this firsthand. Judges are usually pretty fair, but they're human, right? And nobody wants to be the person that after the fact says, oh my gosh, I gave the gun back to the guy and he shot up a place. And since there's this presumption of guilt, based on the fact that they've already deemed you dangerous and taken your guns away, what judges in the land is going to, no matter how fair he is going to want to be the guy that gives you your gun back? Think about that. So how this so-called due process, not only is it after the fact, but how realistic is it? Who do you think is going to get their guns back? Right? You've got to prove you're innocent of something that hasn't happened, and even if you can somehow do that, what judge is going to want to be the guy that gives you the guns back? A lot of problems there. And then you have the fact that any random person can report you. You're not talking about mental health professionals or trained law enforcement investigators who might or might not be trained to spot aberrant or suspicious or behavior that indicates an impending danger. You're talking about random people who may or may not even know you all that well. A distant relative that you see once a year that you had a squabble with over Thanksgiving. Somebody who thinks you took their parking space. A coworker who has a beef with you. An angry ex-girlfriend, whatever. You could even have, as I mentioned when I talked about this before, somebody who just doesn't like the idea of people owning guns and thinks that you have a gun maybe you have an NRA bumper sticker or something, and they report you just because, on general principle, they don't want anybody having guns. And then you could have people who are reported not necessarily because there's a grudge or anything like that, but just because there's a mistake. Somebody hears something, out of context and rushes to judgment. It seems to me that the fact that they're using hearsay to set in motion events that end up with a team of armed police officers being told you're dangerous and sent to your house is setting in, it's not just that your constitutional rights are violated and that you have no due process really that matters. It's that you're setting in motion a dangerous situation, and I'll get to that in a second. And if you think about it, the very fact that a person legally owns a gun, they had to pass a background check, they had to get a firearms ID card, etc. A person who legally has purchased a firearm is actually more vetted than any other person, random person in the public. If you pick 5 guys off the street, chances are none of them have ever had any kind of a criminal background check or anything. Whereas a legal gun owner who legally purchased a firearm, for a fact that they've gone over a background check and they found that he has no history of violent crime and so on and so forth. Or he wouldn't have that gun. So you have a real hurdle to get through to even, it's like the average person, you don't know one way or the other whether he's dangerous. The average legal gun owner, you actually do know based on the fact that he's a legal gun owner and everything he would have had to go through to get that gun. You do know that, at least up until the point when he applied for that, firearms ID card or whatever, and got that gun, that up until that point in his life, that guy had never done a single thing wrong that would make you think he was violent. That would make you think he shouldn't have a gun because they've already checked him out. So, I'm trying to figure out how you get to the point where you're using hearsay from random people who may or may not, know the person or may or may not have a grudge or whatever to send the police to somebody's house to take away their property without due process when there's a really big believability hurdle to get over in terms of believing that that person would be dangerous because you already kind of know they're not based on the fact that they've been able to legally purchase a firearm. Whereas the average person, you don't know anything about them or their potential criminal background. Yeah, really strange how this is set up. And how it's set up is, like I said, very dangerous. You tell the police that they're going to the home of a person who's been deemed a danger and is armed. You tell the person who has the police being sent to their house nothing. And what happened in one particular case in Maryland, where one of these red flag laws was in place for less than 30 days, they served, I think, like 9 or 10 of these things, and they killed one of them. So they've got a 1 out of 10 just in this one county in Maryland. They kill 1 out of 10 so far. That's their track record. And the thing's only been in place for 30 days. That's not a good track record. Because you're not talking about a guy who was waving a gun around. You're not talking about a guy who committed a crime. You're talking about a guy who, in fact, was guilty of absolutely nothing except somebody reported it. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean he really did something? Does that mean that person had a grudge? Does that mean the person who reported him was mistaken? We don't know. And what happened in this case was a relative who did not live with this individual and had a squabble over him. They had some kind of an argument, reported him. The police came with a red flag warrant to seize his guns at 5:30 in the morning. They'd bang on his door. Open up! Now, I don't know about you. Somebody banging on my door at 5:30 in the morning, I'm not going to answer the door empty-handed. I bike a lot, I'm a cyclist, and I do historical fencing. So I'm probably going to answer that door either with a heavy bike lock in my hand or with a longsword or something, right? It's 5:30 in the morning, there's banging on your door. It's probably not somebody who's up to any good. Oh, wait, no, you open the door, it's the police. Well, this guy went to the door with his gun, obviously. He has a gun. Why answer the door with a bike lock when you have a gun? So he enters the door with his gun, and he sees the police, he puts the gun down. And he starts talking to the police. What's going on? Why are you here? The police get to the point where they tell him they're there to take his gun. And he reaches for the gun. And I'll use it as an example. This is what happened. My cell phone, because this is not a gun, but, it's a cell phone. suppose my cell phone's sitting on a table and I'm talking to somebody and they just say out of the blue, oh, by the way, I'm going to take your cell phone. No, you're not. I reach for it and I retain hold of it. Why? It's instinctive, right? It's there. It's not physically in my hand. Somebody else says they're imminently going to seize it right now. I grab it so that they can't seize it. It's just instinctive. Somebody out of the blue tells you they're going to take something from you that's yours. No, you're not. That's what he did with the gun. Of course, they saw he had the gun in hand. They went to grab it out of his hand. In the process, the trigger was pulled. The gun went off. And now that a gun's been fired, the police are like, oh my gosh, he's shooting. Or that's presumably what they thought. In reality, I think what happened is when they tried to pull it out of his hand, if you think about how that works, they probably pulled the trigger by trying to pull it out of his hand. But whatever. The gun is in his hand and it goes off. So they open fire and they shoot him. And he's dead. He's shot to death in his house. Basically, for no other, he didn't commit a crime. He didn't hurt anybody. You have no idea whether he was going to or not. All you know that he did wrong is he answered the door at 5:30 in the morning. Without warning, was thrust into the situation where he's being told out of the blue that hey, we're the police and we're here to take your guns. Which, you always hear from people who want more gun laws. Oh, don't worry, we're not going to take your guns. Or don't worry, we're not going to take your guns. So then you're a gun owner and you open the door and you're groggy. It's 5:30 in the morning. There was banging on the door. It's suspicious. You don't know what's going on. You open the door, and while you're still trying to wake up and wrap your mind around what's happening, it's two policemen and they're saying, "Oh, by the way, we're here to take your guns." I don't know about you, but most of us, I think, in that situation would probably do something that would strike the policeman as odd because we'd be trying to wrap our minds around what the hell is going on. Right? This is something that shouldn't happen in this country. If you're a guilty person who's done something bad with your gun, in other words, a person who deserved to be red flagged, somebody who was making threats or waving the gun around or posting online saying they're going to shoot up a school, whatever, and the police show up and say, we're here to take your guns, you kind of know why they're there. Because you did something stupid or illegal or whatever. You may not want them to take your guns. You may resist or whatever. But the point is, it doesn't surprise you that they're there. You know why they're there because you did something wrong. But for the innocent person who's mistakenly or bogusly reported, this comes out of the blue, right? You're a responsible gun owner. You've never done anything wrong. You've never hurt anybody. And all of a sudden, there's two police knocking on your door saying, out of the blue, we're here to take your guns. You're like, what? That's what happened. So reaching for the gun, was it smart? No. When there's police present, you never reach for a weapon. You keep your hands in plain sight and you try to be as civil and de-escalating as you can. But sending the police to a person's house without warning to tell them that they've already been found guilty, without their knowledge that there was even a question, and that they're just showing up to seize their guns unceremoniously, is not how you de-escalate. The law and the police put the guy in this situation. And normally I don't blame the police, but this is a case where police have the choice to enforce an unconstitutional law or not. Normally, police have no choice over the laws they enforce. But when it's flagrantly denies due process, and when it's almost structured so that it gets somebody killed by putting them in an impossible situation and putting the police in an impossible situation, you have to wonder what cop in his right mind would say, oh, I'm okay with enforcing this. Now, that said, I don't blame the police too much, because if they get objected and say, I'm not enforcing this order, the government probably would have found other police officers to do so. So that probably wouldn't have prevented this from occurring. Which brings me to what did happen. They woke him up at an ungodly hour. He comes downstairs with a gun because it's an ungodly hour. You could say, well, why did they come there so early? Maybe they thought he really was dangerous. That's why they were there after all. So they wanted to catch him unawares. But then when they're talking to him, they didn't secure him or the gun. They're just talking to him like a normal person. So which is it? Did they come to his house so early because they wanted to essentially ambush him because they thought he was so dangerous? Or did they think he was a normal person and not even believe this dangerous thing that they were sent there to enforce? Because after all, they're just sitting there talking to him while he has a gun sitting on an end table or whatever within easy reach. They didn't bother to secure him or the gun. So which is it? Did they come there at an ungodly hour because they thought he was dangerous? Were they even there to enforce this in the first place because they thought he was dangerous? Or did they think he was just a regular guy and they were just filling out some paperwork? Because it can't be both. Anyway, the guy reaches for the gun. It's there, it's not on his person, he's not holding it, and they tell him they're going to take it right down in there. He reaches for it. Who wouldn't? Okay? Again, reaching for a weapon when the police are there, not keeping your hands up when the police are there, is not smart. It is stupid. But think about the situation this guy was put in, how this was sprung on him out of the blue. As far as he knows, zippity-doo-dah, wonderful day, he wakes up to a nightmare. The police are there and they're seizing his property, and he's been deemed some kind of a risk to society while he was asleep. Again, if you're a person who really did do something bad with your gun, when the police show up to take it away, you're going to be like, yeah, I kind of know why they're here. It's not going to surprise you. You might not be happy with it, and you might be kind of annoyed that somebody reported you, but it's not going to surprise you. If you're innocent, you're probably going to react in a way that will actually seem more guilty to the police who've been told to think that you're dangerous, and that's why they're there. Why? Because an innocent person is going to be surprised, shocked, totally taken aback by this. And that's what happened. Guy, as far as he knew, nothing was wrong. He wakes up, there's two guys banging on his door. Hi, we're here to take your guns. What? He reaches for the gun when they say they're going to take it. Does this mean he wanted to shoot the policeman? Does this mean he wanted to do something bad? We don't know. All we know is he reached for it, which is it's not a smart thing to do, but it's a perfectly normal instinctive reaction under the circumstances. Because they put him in this situation out of the blue with no warning, and then, we're going to take it. And he's like, no? Again, we're going to take your cell phone. No, you're not. Yeah, you just reach for it. It's instinctive. Does the fact that he reached for this, it's not smart. It's what precipitated the struggle and then the gun going off and then him being shot. Does the fact that he reached for this make him some kind of moron or retard? No, it makes him human. Chances are, if you or me or any other normal person was put in this situation where, as far as we knew, we're a law-abiding citizen, we're just like everybody else, and then we wake up to the fact that somebody has deemed us a criminal, and there are police here, and they're coming into our house, and they're going to take our stuff. Most of us would probably react in such a way that those police would deem suspicious and might lead to a struggle and might lead to us getting shot. And that's what's so scary about this. The fact that the law is structured so that there's no warning, it's out of the blue. And I kind of understand why they do that. If they tell you they're coming, you might go and hide the gun, right? But at the same time, the whole point is the way the law is structured. You send the police to somebody's house and you tell them they're going there to deal with a violent maniac who's armed. You tell the guy in the house, nothing. As far as he knows, open up! Banging on the door at 5:30. As far as he knows, it's a home invasion crew. This was an accident waiting to happen. And I hate to say I told you so, but when I talked about red flag laws before, I said, sending the police to somebody's house frivolously or by mistake or at the very least without any safeguards in place to deter false red flags, they want to encourage this as much as possible. There's nothing in place saying we should think twice, there should be a safeguard, there should be a legitimate hearing. They have a so-called hearing amongst themselves before they deem you dangerous, but it's just the government talking amongst themselves based on hearsay. If that's a hearing, then, anybody ever hear the term kangaroo court? Yeah, your pouch is showing, okay? The fact that it's without warning and that you tell the police they're going there to deal with somebody who's dangerous, whereas the person, if they really are innocent and falsely reported or reported by accident or whatever, which there's no safeguards to discourage, by the way, again, he has no idea this is coming. And he wakes up to what most people, especially most law-abiding gun owners, would regard as a nightmare. Something that people have been repeatedly assured over and over will not happen in this country. Don't worry, nobody's coming for your guns. Don't worry, we don't really want to do that. And then, knock, knock, they're not just coming for your guns, they're here, okay? And yes, I know the reason people support these laws, at least some of them I think really do support it because they're trying to weaponize law enforcement against gun owners, and they're really trying to use this against their political adversaries on the subject of gun control and firearms ownership to intimidate them, Hey, if you are a gun owner, remember, we could just red flag your ass and get you shot. Excuse my language. I think there are some people thinking like that. And I got to wonder, when they pass laws like this and the laws are abused, Like, are they really being abused, or is that what they're supposed to be doing? But there are some people who I honestly think support these laws out of ignorance or because they haven't thought it through. They just want to do whatever they can to try and prevent crime. And you know what? That's understandable. But it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't excuse it. And because the fact that you have no desire to get an innocent person killed, the fact that you have no desire to get an innocent person killed doesn't bring them back when you set up a situation that leads to that, that's almost designed to lead to that, because it's without warning, without due process, etc. And saying after the fact, oh, woe is me, this isn't what I wanted, when there's a guy dead on the ground who never hurt anybody, and as far as we know is innocent of any wrongdoing, except for maybe opening the door at an early hour of the morning. How can you sleep at night? Yeah, this isn't what you wanted, but it's what you caused, okay? And again, the police could have done something differently maybe, but, ultimately, what set this in motion is the law being in effect. Even if the policeman flat out said, I'm not serving this warrant, I think this is unconstitutional, or I think that strategically this is a bad idea and it's going to get somebody killed, they would have just found another police officer to serve the warrant. So the only thing you can do to prevent this is not have this law. Which brings to a question. I'm sure if you talk to, most police officers aren't out to hurt people. I honestly believe that. I'm sure if you talk to these officers, they'd probably say they'd rather do anything different. If they could do one thing different that would prevent this from having happened, they would rather do something different than have this guy be dead. Well, what if the only thing you could do different is not have this law in the first place? And that's a question not just for these officers, but for the people who support these red flag laws. What if the only thing you can do to prevent collateral damage and innocent people getting killed in the course of trying to enforce your red flag law is not have a red flag law, right? We already know that if people are convicted of a crime, you can take their guns away. That if people are, charged with a serious offense, you can temporarily, disarm them. Why do you need the ability to, based on random hearsay, without any evidence, without a person having their day in court, without any essentially due process, go to somebody's house and set up a situation where at a minimum their rights are being violated and you're confiscating their property, and potentially you're also setting up a situation where they get killed? Who benefits from this? Nobody benefits from this, right? Maybe it prevents some crime. We'll never know because you can't document what doesn't happen, right? Maybe if they hadn't done this guy would have gone out and robbed a liquor store or something. We don't know that. All we do know is that a guy who had no criminal record, who in fact had cleared a background check and been able to purchase a firearm legally, so whatever safeguards are already in place for that, he passed them with flying colors. So, in other words, he's actually been more vetted than the average person in the street like you or me. Was deemed dangerous on a whim. The police were sent to his house, and he was put in an impossible situation where, he then instinctively reached for the gun to retain hold of it when he was told it was going to be taken away from him at that moment without warning. The police saw him reach for the gun, grabbed it. It was caused to go off by the police grabbing it, and then they shot him because the gun was in his hand and it went off, and they're thinking he's shooting. Everything that happened can be traced back. The only thing this guy did wrong that was unreasonable considering the situation he was put in, the only thing he really did wrong was answer the door at 5:30 in the morning. That's all we know. Maybe if the police hadn't done this and this warrant hadn't been served and he hadn't been red flagged, maybe he would have turned out to be like the next Ted Bundy or something. But we'll never know. All we do know is that a guy who, as far as anyone could tell, was completely innocent. And in fact, again, given that he, cleared the safeguards for buying a firearm, was actually documented to be more innocent than you or me, was shot dead because he answered the door at an early hour of the morning. And there's no safeguards in place to prevent this. And again, like I said, in this particular county in Maryland, the law's been in place for 30 days. They've served 9 or 10 of these things, and they killed 1 out of 10. That's not a good track record in the first 30 days, okay? I just, like I said, I talked about this before. I said it's worrisome that you're going to have like a new McCarthyism where people are encouraged to report other random people, that there's no safeguards to prevent false or mistaken reporting, that it could be abused. that there's really no due process because they maybe give you a hearing afterwards. And again, how do you prove you're innocent if something that hasn't happened? And what judge is going to want to give you the gun back? Then there's the fact that by sending the police to somebody's house, telling the police they're going to deal with a dangerous armed person, and telling the person who's getting the police sent to their house nothing, and springing this on them at the last minute, that you're basically setting up a position where somebody could get hurt very easily. And I did say, what's going to happen when somebody gets killed because of this? Well, we didn't have to wait very long. The law's been in effect, at least in that one place, for 30 days, and there's already been a first fatality. And, this is not good. And these red flag laws are not good. And I don't know about you. I don't want to live in a society where any random person can send the cops to the house of somebody who, as far as anyone knows, is innocent and either get their property taken away and their rights violated, or maybe even get them killed. I just don't want to live in a society like that. This isn't what this country is supposed to be about. All right? Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? Whatever happened to due process? Whatever happened to the Bill of Rights? Whatever happened to the fact that, yes, we all want to prevent crime. But, there's a difference between doing whatever we can within the safeguards of the Constitution and of our societal structure of legitimate government to prevent crime, and between going full on, crazy person, nutso land, like that Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, where they're incarcerating people for crimes that they think they might commit. Well, here they're not incarcerating people for crimes they might commit. What they are doing is deeming them dangerous and going to their house and seizing their property. And just a thought, the fact that you don't own a gun doesn't mean you're safe from this. Somebody could red flag anybody. If they look through their list and see, okay, he doesn't have a firearms ID card or a gun license or whatever, they may just figure, well, you just own a gun off the books and raid your house anyway. So the fact that you're not a gun owner doesn't necessarily mean you're safe. There's nothing in place to discourage false reporting. There's really no safeguards in place because, again, this so-called hearing that happens beforehand is the government deciding amongst themselves to take away your guns. And since the whole point of passing these laws was actually to encourage that sort of thing, this is absolutely wrong. When this kind of thing occurs at a traffic stop, because somebody may or may not have done something wrong to draw the attention of the police in the first place, it's cause for civil rights protests and for people to question police procedure. When a person who did nothing wrong, as far as anybody can tell, has the police sent to their house on a whim, and they're killed in their own home, no outrage, no civil rights protests, nobody marching in the streets, nobody really even raising any issue. And when the subject is discussed, it's discussed in terms of, well, the police shot a dangerous person. Again, how does anybody know this guy was dangerous? He was a 60-year-old man turned out of his bed at 5:30 in the morning who went downstairs with his gun to answer the door because it was 5:30 in the morning, and as far as he knew, some miscreant was banging on his door. They put him in this position where, without warning, they answered the door, prompting him to go downstairs with whatever he had handy. Again, in my case, it might be a bike lock. In his case, it was his gun. And then they said, oh, they're going to take that, and he instinctively reached for it, which anybody would do in that situation, or could do. Some people might have more self-control than others, but you're a 60-year-old man who's barely awake, and all of a sudden 2 guys are banging on your door telling that everything you know about your civil rights and your due process and everything has been a lie. And, things that you may have only dismissed, if you're a moderate, as, right-wing fantasy and fear-mongering about people taking your guns, you've actually woken up into a reality where that's actually the case. And you're still trying to wrap your mind around that when they zip you up in the body bag and it's hi-ho to the next one. And again, I don't believe these police officers woke up in the morning and said, I want to shoot an innocent man. I'm sure if they could, they would do anything they could differently to prevent this from happening. But what I'm saying is, I think the only thing you can do differently is not have red flag laws, okay? The sentiment behind them, I understand why people want to prevent crime. But what about perpetrating a worse crime? How many innocent people are going to get killed because of these things? We already know one did. How many more? How many more? And why aren't people talking about it? Lone Runner out.